Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of our new series, Not Another Demo, where the West Michigan Cloud Security Alliance tries to cut through some of the nonsense, some of the marketing fluff, and get right to the heart of what a vendor and their products can do for you or for your organization. We're joined today by Mr. Brian Schneble from SentinelOne, and also have Aaron Bregg and Lloyd from the Cloud Security Alliance board. With that, fellas, if you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll pass things over to Brian and get this started.
Defer to Lloyd this time since I went first last time.
You're gonna let me go first. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Lloyd, and I am one of the board members here on Cloud Security Alliance West Michigan. As Matt mentioned, my day job is in healthcare for a major organization here in the Grand Rapids, West Michigan area.
And my name is Aaron Bregg. Besides being the smooth jazz radio DJ for the Cloud Security Alliance, I do have a day job also working for a major healthcare organization. And I am also one of the directors of professional outreach for the Cloud Security Alliance of West Michigan.
Mr. Schneble?
Gotcha. Brian Schneble. I'm actually on the sales side, not on the technical side for a security company called SentinelOne. I've been in the security space for about a year with an engineering background and spent a lot of time working in autonomy, AI, and electrification and automotive for the last 16 years. Oh, and thank you guys also for having me on. I've been looking
Totally
forward
informal. This is our fun. We talk a lot about changing the narrative, and that's what we're trying to do here, is make this a conversation, make it less formal and a little more fun. So to that point, is it Schneble? I've been saying Schneble, and I pronounced it totally wrong. So
it's
Schneble,
okay.
So Schneble, like School of Rock Schneble.
Yes, it is exactly like School of Rock.
Fantastic.
It's funny because when somebody, like when I say the name like Brian Schneble, and they're like, I get this look, and I'm not sure if it's A, have we met? B, are they thinking School of Rock? Or C, are they looking at the spelling on whatever name tag I'm wearing and trying to repronounce what I just said, right?
That could be
probably all the above.
A little bit.
Yeah. So it's funny, in our company, when I was asked my first day, and I'm kind of glad I said this, my boss asked Brian, he goes, what do you go by? I said, Brian, is it Schneble? Is there some other name? I said, you can just say Schneebs. Everyone says Schneebs, all my friends, family. So he sent out, I didn't realize why he was asking. Whenever somebody new joins the company, they send out a mass email to everybody in the company, right? So I was introduced as Schneebs. From this day forward, I don't care what executive I run into, everything is Schneebs. All my emails are Schneebs, Slack message, Schneebs. And it's kind of funny because I feel it's more personal, right? It's like, I don't even know this person, and he just called me Schneebs.
Isn't it funny how in such a digital world, anytime that we can make things be a little less digital feels good. And again, that is kind of the purpose of what we're trying to do here. So to that point, Aaron, Lloyd, unless you guys have some questions right out of the gate, Brian, why don't you give us a bit of an overview of SentinelOne, what you guys do, and again, tell us why would someone spend the time to talk to SentinelOne?
Outside of just making really good cookies for Cloud Security Alliance events,
True.
We're a security vendor, and an endpoint solution is kind of, when I joined the company, what was talked about a lot. As of today, it's definitely more of a platform. You hear the terms, EDR and XDR now being used a lot. And what does that mean? The reality is there is a lot of companies that came out. You look at AV, right? An antivirus solution that was using signatures. And those solutions for a long time were what were in place in organizations. And even today, you're still seeing a lot of legacy AV being used. And I'm free to say this because even representing my own company, they would say this, but legacy AV is pretty much dead in terms of when you look at an EDR, how it actually is used and why it would be used in an organization.
What is an EDR? You're using
just about to ask.
You're using acronyms.
Yeah.
So that's
not another demo mode that we go into real quickly.
Yeah. So that's that endpoint detection and response. And even for me, when I joined, I came from the automotive industry, and it was like, for us, like the word SIM wasn't spelled SIEM, it was spelled CIM. It was a cost index measurement. And your SIM was whatever the price is over here in this country, we want it by this exchange rate in this country. So when people kept saying, you know, how do you integrate with a SIM? I'm like, do you mean how do we reduce our price to match whatever price we offered over? It was, right? A lot of acronyms. So
into trouble.
EDR, endpoint detection and response. So what you have is you have the original legacy AV companies. Then you had EPP, endpoint protection, right? And it was still using kind of a pre-execution tool, because that's really what legacy AV is. You're looking at signatures. It's pretty much a preventative mode, right? EPP came out. Again, preventative, but instead of looking at signatures, you're now looking at attributes, right? So taking into account like eye color, size of nose, hair color, height. You look at the attributes of a file rather than a signature. And now you're kind of analyzing what could be bad or good, and then kind of giving it a bandwidth to say, well, this is more bad than we would like to see. We're going to convict it and go ahead and click it, right? Or hold it. And sometimes people say, well, some of these EPPs have a lot of false positives. Well, some of the new attributes that you're seeing in the environment, even from going pre-COVID to COVID, there's new attributes that you're seeing all the time now in files. The behavior, if you want to call behavior mechanisms, right, that threat actors are using change. As soon as the business structure changes, the threat actor changes.
I could almost argue that people may just have to get used to false positives, because as you know, as the bad guys get better, as AI comes into play, I would almost rather have things looked at. You know, this isn't development, right? Like continuous, you know, improvement, continuous delivery. Development, that's a little bit different. That false positive, you know, could impact a lot of stuff. Most of the time that you're talking about is an end user, you know, hey, are you sure to open this? If we're telling people to think twice when clicking on links and opening things in spam, and for example, like our security awareness program, they're pretty sweet. You know, when in doubt, ship it over to the spam team. They take a look at it. If they're not sure, they detonate in a sandbox. So it's almost like we're trying to program end users to be a little bit more cautious. So maybe us as an industry maybe need to sell false positives a little bit differently. Does that make sense?
It does, but I think also what you'll see with the technologies, like especially on the EDR, the endpoint detection response space, as more organizations start to adapt EDR, you realize a lot of the false positives that you see out the gate sometimes are people's homegrown code and systems that they're writing at organizations, because you bought a tool and then you had to create, you know, internal programs, procedures that you wrote. Mm-hmm. So now when we come in and you're using an EDR and endpoint detection response, what you're doing is you're looking for techniques and tactics. So if you compare that to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, all those techniques, PowerShell by itself isn't bad. AppleScript by itself isn't bad. A lot of these aren't bad by themselves, but you're writing your own internal codes and you're using some of those, what you would call techniques, to do things, right? So we're going to pick up on that at first. So I would say in the first 90 days, when you're using one of those new solutions, or first 30 days, is really when you see a lot of the false positives, if you're going to see them, right? It all depends on the organization. Some have a little more noise than others. And I'm not going to go into a whole marketing stint, because I just got done with the whole.
And we won't let you.
Yeah, no, we won't.
Yeah. Well, I may have gotten into a whole little dispute on LinkedIn with the company that was marketing materials.
I saw that. I saw that over lunch yesterday. I was like, fact checking people. It's a good thing, because we'll pause for a minute, because I got a couple follow-up questions for you. In this day and age of false information, and I'm not even going to use the term fake news, because that means a whole different thing, but just misinformation is only going to grow because we're remote. I even read a study or interesting article lately about like Facebook. Like Facebook's basically to the point where they just want to have eyes on, so they don't even care about falsification. They don't even care about like quality or content anymore. And showing where it's causing a bigger and bigger divide I think it was good that you politely called out like a vendor, right? Like if you ask for the facts, they then said, oh, well, here's the link. You double checked that and then found out that, they were kind of squishy. I think this in the age of misinformation, that was good. So I do want to commend you on that, because I thought you were being professional about it. You were just saying, hey, I would like to check it out because our company is here, and we all know Gartner's kind of all over the place. I like them. I have a meeting with them this afternoon, but even their stuff's a little all over the place.
And that wasn't even technically a Gartner graph. That was using, and what you call about misinformation, you take the way Gartner puts it up, then you take a MITRE result, and you change what MITRE actually was testing. Like, did MITRE go and actually show the number of alerts companies had? It called out the number of detections. It was the vendor's job to show their alerts. So when you create your own graph using a Gartner framework, a MITRE result, and then make it your own, but it's inaccurate for all the other vendors you included, maybe not for yourself, but for anyone that, even if you were in the tech space or not in the tech space, all you have to do is look at that and not even read the lengthy post. You just look at the picture real quick. A picture is worth 1,000 words. And somebody would walk away without ever fact checking it. And that's where I was like, so I appreciate that. And we don't have to dive into that more, but I guess just from a company standpoint, one thing I can say too, without even talking about the technology, and I've heard this from a few people, and I came from a completely different industry. I think it's very important to be humble and stay humble. And I've said this to a few different sales guys in my own organization. Regardless if you're talking to a VAR, an enterprise, public sector, it doesn't matter. Regardless how you grow successfully as an organization and a company, one person didn't define who the company was and became. It was a collective result of a lot of people and usually really good technology, right? I have written on my wall, stay humble. Not here at the cottage, but it's literally written on the basement wall. And I like to think that I've heard this from a lot of people, like, hey, one thing I've enjoyed about you guys is you're pretty humble. And I say, well, from a messaging and a content standpoint, this was something that our executives have really kind of beaten down, is if we're going to show results, regardless of, if it's Gartner, if it's MITRE, any lab, etc., we're going to show their results. And then if we show how we believe we did, we're going to show how we did, and not try to make up a story on why we did better than everybody else. Especially when there's certain testing companies out there that don't actually give a clear winner. They're just showing the data as they see it. And I think that's important, because when you talk about misinformation, there's a really good book called Future Crimes. If you haven't read it, it's the whole reason I'm not even on Facebook or Instagram. I'm not even on Twitter anymore. I'm only on LinkedIn, and that's because from a professional organization, we have to be on LinkedIn. There's a lot when you look at misinformation and how your information's used, going even to a privacy side. Like if I use DuckDuckGo versus Google, there's times where when I'm looking for one of my favorite recipes, I'm like, oh, I'm just going to go back to Google because it knows what I want, right? It really does. Yeah. I have to really specify in DuckDuckGo what I'm looking for. So it adds that different level and a different level of flavor. But I have that conversation with people that are in security, and they're like, yeah, but is that bad? I'm like, is it good? There's a lot of reasons, and I don't want to get too off topic, but there's a lot of reasons why you could say maybe that's not good. And that goes right back to even the MITRE testing in itself. When you look at the latest round 2, so APT 29, that was a group that went after the DNC. And then look at all the companies out there that use misinformation just around what happened. Not necessarily that group, that threat actor group itself, but the people that were able to use the misinformation around that. So I look at security kind of tenfold there. Like there's so many different layers, not in security in terms of Aaron or Lloyd, what you use in your environment, but in when an incident or a breach happens, and then how that's perceived by the growing public. right? And then how that information could be used when people find out your information was exposed. And if you're on Facebook, there's so many different ways that information can be shared in terms of not your personal information, but the act that happened and why it's so bad. And everybody gives their own flavor of what bad is. But anyways, I could go on.
Well, let's go back to false positives real quick, because as you were talking about that, it made me think of another technology that uses detection, like DLP. So you get a lot of noise with DLP. So when you start talking about, endpoint detection, that kind of stuff, and you get all these false positives, what can you as an organization think about to go into your policies to kind of minimize that noise? Obviously, you're going to want some sort of baseline over, I think we talked about, like a couple months. You kind of see what's going on. You may be having development practices that kind of mimic those behaviors, but what can we do to kind of squelch that false positive noise as we look to our implementations past POC?
Yeah, I think that's where the machine learning comes in, and where the tool itself, where if you have a really strong behavioral agent and really good machine learning, you won't see a lot of that false positives. And I think where companies get off on the wrong foot with organizations is if you go into a POC with a company and you just kind of turn up the volume on your managed services or the background, right? And you're just turning off false positives. What happens then when you're actually in their environment they've launched and now they're the ones tuning it? Right? And now they're getting hit with false positives. And that's where I said at some point in this conversation, I pivot to talk about support. So what do we do from a support aspect? Like once you launch, what do your numbers look like when you talk about in terms of average time on phones, first response to an SLA, right? What do your times look like? And our average time to answer a phone call is 30 seconds or less. In
now, let me pause you for a minute. So I'm not familiar with your support structure. So are you saying you offer like phone support for the people that don't have, say, a security engineer, or for companies that do have security engineer, you can give like a second level support? How does your support structure work?
So we call it the whole follow the sun. So we have support organization in Oregon, support organization out of Europe. I think 2 locations now, but the one is in the Netherlands, other one's in France, and then another one in Tokyo. It's 24/7 for an enterprise support team or an enterprise IT team, right? So even if you had no security, maybe you only had 2 guys within your organization that are considered security, so you went with a managed service provider, used our managed services, you still have the 24/7 support. We offer 9x5 support, but there's no organization out there that doesn't want 24/7. We pretty much just made it where it's a blended one line item now. You just 24/7 support with the solution is what people want. And I started to say that that's really important. The more that I've heard, and I'm not talking any other vendors, the more I've heard about situations or from organizations of even why they're talking to us is we've just had a really bad experience. And how so? And I asked the question, how so? And then I'm thinking I'm going to hear about an incident or something that just took place. And what they're talking about is overall support. Like, hey, we have these issues. We've opened up tickets. Some of these will go months on end before we get an answer or before it's closed. And I was like, really? So that was kind of eye-opening to me. And remember, I came from outside the industry. So understanding what industry norms are, and I really feel like there's when you guys said not another demo, I mean, I really feel like there's a pulse here where people are like, I just need to get in, get the demo done, get them signed, close, let everybody technical and support take over after there, and I'm gone.
Yeah,
right?
It's very it's very mechanical, and a lot of it is metric driven, and some companies run off of metrics and whatever, but it becomes very mechanical. And I feel like that's what we're trying to break down a little bit here, right? At the end of the day, we're people that are, all working together. We've, from a Cloud Security Alliance standpoint, some of the stuff that makes me the happiest is seeing people from competing companies or in the same vertical sitting at one of our meetings talking with each other about security problems that they're having, because we're always stronger together than we are apart. I would say also from a support standpoint, in terms of like what I see with my day job, When companies are displacing one vendor for another vendor, I would say it's probably about 90% of the time it's not a technology issue as much as it is a support issue. When I see people that are doing a rip and replace type situation, it's almost always because they've gotten really bad support, or they only talk with their sales team when there's a new PO or a new product or things along those lines. So I think that aspect of it is super critical in terms of, so I guess to that point, you know, outside of say break fix calling calls or whatever, right? If there's an issue that's going on, can you talk a little bit more about other stuff that SentinelOne does from a post sales and support standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically there's companies that are just going to say, and I've seen this as even as we go through POCs, right? Companies will tell them, you know, you can make a support ticket. We'd actually like you to do that to see how support responds back. But we all know that some companies just kind of crank up their support during a POC then.
Yeah.
But we always say you can call us. But afterwards, once you've, let's say, closed the deal, right? And now they're deploying, right? So we do have deployment services. And I've been told, like, hey, Brian, you can't call it deployment services. That's not the name that we give it, right? And so diving into it, I still like to call it deployment services, because what you're doing is for the first 90 days, we can offer what we call our vigilance respond. And vigilance respond is us taking over, like from a managed service, vigilance respond would be typically a yearly service that we provide. And that's us handling every threat, triage, et cetera, all the way through. So for the first 90 days, the reason we offer it as part of deployment is that's also typically when you do your whitelisting, right? Where you put in your exclusions. And if you're talking to an organization, either an organization that's really large or an organization that could be small, just doesn't have a lot of security guys, and they're going from a legacy AV to this EDR, this endpoint detection and response tool. For them, this console could be very brand new in terms of they haven't seen all these buttons and all this new information and whoa, what is telemetry data and why is this important, right? And the storyline and all this, like, because you're correlating data, right? That's how EDRs were built, was on the idea of using techniques, tactics, correlating those together to be able to build out why you convict something. So to offer that for 90 days is really important. But going back to just those metrics that you were talking about, so you offer this deployment service, right? What if you don't get the deployment service? Are you still there to be able to take a phone call? I would like to say I'm always available, but then again, I'm not a tech guy, right? SEs are always available. I know my SE makes himself available for phone calls all the time, but our support team is really the team that you're supposed to go to. But I don't want people to think they can't just call us, and we'll even help set up sometimes a support ticket if it's something that we can't dive into or something that's new to us. And that becomes important because you say, okay, time to resolution. If I said that our time to resolution in 2019 was less than 10 days, right? Some people would say, well, that doesn't sound good. That sounds kind of lengthy. But if you look at that in terms of the number of days,
depends on what the ask is.
Right. It could be what the task is. And some of those support tickets that are open could be somebody moving from on-prem to the cloud. That process could take them a month to do, right? Especially if it's a 50,000, 100,000 endpoint company. So there's unique challenges when we say, you know, why that number would be what it is. But the average hold time on a phone, 30 seconds, in the 90-day customer satisfaction was 97.6% over the last 6 months, 98.9% in 2019. So yeah, we went down a little bit there, but we've also seen this huge increase from work from home because it seems like people are by their phones more readily just to be able to make a phone call. But I like to hit on that because I think it's important, and nobody talks about the metrics. Most of some of the metrics that people have are just how fast to close out a ticket. So the behavior behind the people that are trying to close them out is, what can I do just to close this real quick?
Closed, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And now they're opening up another ticket, right?
You can get me going for hours on bad metrics and what doesn't work and what actually works and why we always seem focused on the wrong metrics. But when it comes to that 90-day service, when you guys are done with that 90-day service, what do you see organizations really struggle with as they take over? Do they continue with that service forward, or do they say, nope, we're going to do this, and wow, they made a mess, and then they end up ripping and replacing? Are there like governance aspects they're just not doing? What do you see at the end of that deployment service window that organizations start to struggle with, that they need to think about as they take over the management and maintenance of that service?
That's a really good question. And
it came from Lloyd, not me.
For once.
Good job, Lloyd.
So the 90-day service of giving vigilance with the deployment is new to 2020. Previously, it was just a deployment service. But what you found was if you had one team that was just doing deployment, your team that really does vigilance, respond, they're the ones that really know the whitelisting, the exclusions, et cetera, because they're involved in people's environments 365 days out of the year. So incorporating them in was important. I think the one thing we see organizations struggle with, I won't call it struggle, is I'll just kind of put it out there because I feel like this is why some companies go with an easy button over here. Like, well, this AV had a really good easy button. We just hit the easy button and, whitelist became blacklist, and we just kept hitting the button. Companies that will just end up saying, yeah, we were in detect mode, and instead of being in detect mode and really kind of looking things through, we're just going to move everything to protect mode. And what protect mode does inside our system, I mean, it's instead of flagging on something and allowing you to investigate, they get busy, and maybe for a week or two, they put it in protect mode and then go back to detect mode. But in time, it's like they really learn to trust the tool. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing. If you have a tool that can do that, great. But I think one thing you see is organizations that didn't have a big security unit, then become reliant on that, and they don't necessarily understand the fundamentals of what that tool is doing, right? It's a good thing because from a behavior standpoint, it's picking up, detecting things, quarantine, killing, rolling back, et cetera. But from the standpoint of the user, you've now made it very easy for them so they don't have to understand the details, and they're not spending as much time going in to really look at why was this one killed, right? Like going in and seeing that telemetry data to understand. And that's why you have a tool.
You got to understand, though, you're going to have different levels of technical knowledge. And I think first of all, I think it's very smart that you guys are starting to understand the power of small businesses and medium businesses, especially since the competition with large businesses is just going to grow because of constricted budgets. What I mean by that is your company starting to utilize machine learning and then in the future an AI different way, because you're going to have a different type of end user. When I say end user, I don't mean the actual person that the endpoint's on, the admin assistant or anything else. When I say user, I mean like the customer. You're going to have different levels of customer. You're going to have this small mom and pop where I need to turn it on like medium, right? Medium level. I kind of know a little bit about technology, or I'm going to send this alert over to my, my cousin that does my IT support. Then you're going to have a medium-sized business, then medium relative to the real world. I mean, Meyer and Herman Miller and others are in West Michigan ones are technically medium sized. They're big for us in West Michigan, but they're still medium sized companies. So they're going to have some skill set to be able to decipher stuff. And then finally, you're going to have your large enterprises that have the people that can dig into that even before they go in there. So how are you guys utilizing technology, knowing that you're going to have three different types of users?
So I want to hit on 3 points there, because what you say is very important, because there's several different verticals. Most people look at the state of Michigan, the first thing they think is automotive, but we're also a giant healthcare state, right? And just from manufacturing, what the assembly line did for manufacturing really drove a lot of new manufacturing companies in Michigan over 100 years ago. That's why you have some of the furniture companies that we have. There's several different verticals of manufacturing companies within the state. And like you said, small, medium, and large. One thing is you have to have a console that's easy to use and adaptable. And what I mean by that is to be able to have multi-tenancy. So you say a medium-sized company, but they're still a large company. You look up any, whether it's Herman Miller, you look up Hayworth, they have locations all over the world. And if they can have multi-tenancy, we had a conversation with a company that said, we have one IT guy in China, and he basically has access into our entire network. We'd like to go ahead and cut certain things off, but how do we do that, right? Like, it's, well, okay, if you're going to make policy, right, and now you have multi-tenancy, so you start here with home base, right? This is home base up here at the top, and as you build your sites out, you're building your sites and organizations based on your different locations. And in each one of those sites, you can have it by desktops, servers, VDI, however you want it set up. So now what you've done is you've empowered to say at the top, these are the rules we're going to put in place, right? That these rules will then flow all the way down. And then in these locations, I can change these up where you can have different levels of admin. So up here at the top, the guys on this call, we're the 4 levels of admin, we're the highest level. Then these locations here in South America, our 2 IT guys are only going to have admin level from this level down within those parts of the organization, but not all the way up into our server farms here locally or here, except, and those things become important, right? So multi-tenancy becomes, and it's such an, I won't say easy thing, but it's.
I was gonna say, be careful. Be careful with that word.
You say multi-tenancy and they're like, yeah, but they do one thing. Well, no, that's one really big thing for an organization. So now you're talking a tool where if you're a really large corporation, let's talk some of the Fortune 10, right? Or even some of the automobile companies. You have manufacturing plants and locations and sales organizations globally, right? Now you're setting up your sites even by region for the IT teams. And even this IT team, they may make their own purchase in Europe, but now you're still able to set the council up together, right? And have different tiers of that. So that becomes important. So that's one aspect where you say small, medium, and large, how is that tool useful? The other part to that is you said AI, and everyone uses that term, but
I said machine learning and AI.
And AI, right? But AI is just the idea of creating some level of artificial intelligence and autonomy. So in automotive, if you were looking at a manufacturing line or in furniture production, a manufacturing line, and let's say you created an automated line from beginning to end, when it produces a part, it's going to produce a part in said takt time. And that takt time is the idea of how long it takes from when this first part and component goes in, all the other components go in, the WIP, the work in progress, and then a part comes out at the end. Does it ever improve? No, because it's AI, right? It's an autonomous line. Unless somebody goes out there and tweaks the line once a month to improve the line. And what's that sound like? That sounds like going in and putting signatures in, right? Unless you're going in to tweak the system once a month to improve upon it, you're never going to improve the speed of the line to produce the finished good faster, meaning your overall ROI, return on investment, your profitability doesn't necessarily increase, right? Now, let's say you have AI and autonomous line, right? So we add in the idea of being able to do autonomous remediation, where you actually have the ability to remediate across, whether it's Windows, whether it's across Mac, whether it's across Linux, the ability to automate your remediation process, right? So you set it to protect mode. And that's why I said that's kind of the easy button for people. They're like, wow, it can remediate across all 3 of those things. You have the AI built in. But without the machine learning, it never gets better. If you're driving that car around the corner at 70 miles an hour, right? And you have a level 3 autonomy and it comes around the corner, if that car was cloud reliant, would you actually believe that it's going to protect your family and make a decision like that? So that's the other part to that cloud reliancy. If you're coming around that corner, you need that machine to make a decision in real time that says, hey, the driver's sleeping. I'm going to test the brakes, feel the muse surface. Is it wet? Is it sandy? And I'm going to make a calculation real quick about how much brake pressure is going to be applied, how far I'm going to turn the angle of that steering wheel based on the weight of the vehicle, and try to absorb that coming into the corner, reducing speed into a 45 mile an hour incline coming down. And yes, I was in automotive for a really long time. But there's
I mean, these things are all important because when you get into UEBA and user behavior analytics, which I think needs to mature, especially with going remote, and then it needs to mature, because the next question I'm going to answer you, because, you know, we only got a few more minutes here, is talking about the future. Now that more and more devices need to be autonomous, not just in the Amazon warehouse, not just in your factory floor. We're talking about, Lloyd and I are knee deep in stuff where traditional medical devices now are moving into the field.
Right.
So I need you to, you know, I need you, when I say you, I mean vendors and, you know, and like endpoint protections. I need you guys to start thinking outside the box, different ways to protect that, right? Because, you know, everybody talks about device identity, which is good, and you know, the data that it's putting out having an identity, which is good, but there's still, you know, SCADA and IoT. I know it's a marketing jingle from, yeah, it's going to be billions of devices everywhere, and yes, now it's pretty much it's here.
So to what you were just talking about, like, how is this changing with work from home? And like I was talking about, coming around that corner really fast, being cloud reliant, having that cloud reliancy or being dependent on it means you have dwell time. And if you have dwell time, if you have a really good tool, but it still has some bit of cloud reliancy to make a decision, just like your family in the vehicle, you wouldn't trust the cloud to be able to make the decision that fast. Yes, you want the information after it's made the decision to go to the cloud, and then using machine learning, it's communicating to every other vehicle the situation when it came around that corner, and it's learned from it. Same thing it should do in your environment, right? So now when you start talking about this IoT discovery and control, right? So how can you help an organization if there's all these tools they need to buy? How does SentinelOne then differentiate? To be able to use, without doing a marketing pitch, to be able to use literally the agent that you've now deployed within your environment to actively, passively scan your environment. As long as you have an agent in every subnet, now you can scan and do device discovery. And where the solution is today, because this is something we came out with beginning of this year, but we've worked on for a year, and there's more, you know, in terms of when people talk about roadmap. SEs freak out. They're like, Brian, no, don't say roadmap. But there's a lot to the idea of what that product would be. So today in its infancy is the idea that if you can actively, passively scan, then you can fingerprint all known and unknown devices. So simple enough, just to say, I'm a large organization. I don't even know how many printers I have connected to my network. And no, nobody has an Alexa on my network. And then you put it in, and we've had companies test it. They're like, no way. I found 5 Alexas somehow on our network, right? I found 25 cameras just in one building on our network. I found
I'm gonna ask you about a pitfall with that, which is a great idea. And you have companies like Tanium and others that are doing stuff like that. But one of the things that can happen is then you can cause a lot of CPU cycles burning up at the wrong times, and bandwidth issues when you're trying to, you know, send that communication back together. So what are you guys doing differently to avoid that issue? Because the first thing that some of the teams that support, you know, laptops, and Lloyd's just gonna chuckle when I say this.
I'm already chuckling.
Not another endpoint. When, you know, we have support teams that say, go to security, and literally say, not another endpoint, because this one did this or this one did this, and they deal with the fallout.
Yeah.
How are, you know, so
I used to be on that side, and I had to fight against security for all of the agents and scanning and stuff screwing up my technology out in the field.
Yeah. Because I mean, if it impacts,
I'm also going to throw out the 2-minute warning for everybody.
Oh, yeah.
This one was going to go long, but
yeah. So the first thing I'll say, like, is the ability to be able to say that you're only going to actively scan or you're only going to passively scan. You lose some functionality, but you can still use it based on the use cases you want. Making the tool, like you said, for large, small, medium-sized companies, especially companies that do manufacturing, you wouldn't want to shut down any production, right? So if you're sitting there port knocking, you're really going to beat up certain locations and put yourself in a position where you don't want to be. And the tool is still growing, but even in its infancy, it's in the companies you mentioned are great companies, you know, Tanium, Forescout, et cetera. What they're doing and how they do it is different than how we're doing it. And without giving away any of the secret sauce, We're definitely not trying to, well, we're trying to compete with everybody. We're not trying to say we do everything they do today. But what we're doing and how we're doing it is definitely different. And so when you talk about bandwidth and CPU, it's another reason why when I was talking about cloud reliancy, not being cloud reliant, well, so, okay, you're on the endpoint, you're making a decision on the endpoint. How much CPU are you taking up on the computer then, right? Still less than 2%, right? And you're still under 200 megs or anywhere from 180 to 220. But it's one of the reasons why we're not in terms of having a cell phone platform. Anyone that says they have an EDR solution but also does EDR for your cell phone, it's not the same flavor that they're selling you for your endpoint, because there's just the memory consumption there isn't there for the type of tool that we have, having a really strong behavioral agent. So not being cloud reliant, being able to make a decision directly on the endpoint to convict and execute, and then transmit that information up to the cloud, right? If you're using the cloud for any of that communication and back down, there's a dwell time there. And that's where I beat up when I was talking to you guys about the whole cookie recipe, right? Like, if you can't detect something in 22 seconds or less, then by the time you get to 150 seconds, all the really bad stuff happens after 22 seconds. And what I mean by that is all you have to do is take one macro-enabled Word document that then launches PowerShell, fetches an emotet, and then pulls down MacTub ransomware. If you put in a lab setting in 22 seconds, all the executables, all the techniques that it uses, if you haven't detected what it's doing, you can't stop what it's ultimately going to do. So that's where the EDRs become real powerful. So
I want to get one last question in, Matt. I know we got to wrap this up, but I'm really curious, Brian, with the, they've done the POC, they've signed the deal, they're using it for a few months. What are some of the most, the great positive things you hear back, and maybe a negative one if you have it, but what are some of the things that customers will say after the end of the day and they've closed on this and they're using it? What do they seem to get most excited about?
So usually when you say the first 90 days, the initial feedback is, wow, easiest deployment we've had. And you're going to sit back and say, everyone says that. That really is, I'm coming from outside the industry, so to hear that, that's a great compliment. Easiest deployment we've had. The second thing is, in terms of ease of use, like use cases they find, if there's one guy on the team that's a real kind of spirited security guy and really wants to learn how to do threat hunting, there's always one guy on the team that kind of really starts to use the tool a lot. And he'll start talking about some of the investigative use cases that he was able to do in the first 90 days. And there's no bigger win than that, because if they can show that to the management team, like, hey, this is something that happened, we investigated, this is what we found out. And the best and worst case scenario, it turns out to be an executive that ended up clicking on something he wasn't supposed to. So, those are great stories.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm going to wrap this one up.
Yep.
We knew it was going to be epic. Mr. Schneble, appreciate you joining us. Yeah, we'll make sure all your contact information and all that good stuff is up. Everybody watching this, please like, subscribe, comment, do all of that sort of good stuff. And we will see you all episode 3.
Thanks, guys.